Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio, 810 AM, and RJ TV, channel 224 on Sky Cable, and TV Plus boxes, and Facebook, and YouTube. This is Eric Lecain here talking about the most interesting stuff going on around the world, spreading the news around the Philippines, giving out baskets chock full of knowledge that you can impress your friends with at parties. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the U.S. elections. Also, what is North Korea really up to these days? The surprises happening in the Ukraine. Why are rich people losing all their money? And a big health scare that is not COVID. So let's jump into this ocean of news right here on the World News Jam on RJTV. Democracy. It's an interesting word. Basically, it's a form of government in which people decide who will lead a country, not an autocratic leader with his paid military. The people will decide who will run their country. Now, sometimes democracy doesn't seem to work, mostly when a population votes for what many see as a very, very bad leader for a country. And this leader has used a form of manipulation of the less educated and poorer parts of the population to get votes. We see time and time again when people vote for a corrupt leader who actually wants to do away with democracy and use the population to enrich himself and keep himself in power. Then we watch TV as the people have to rise up and expel this leader and say, let's not do that again. And then the process starts all over again. Lately, democracy has been on the edge of being removed from many of our lives. A lot of people in the world actually think that corrupt authoritarian leaders are the way to go. I mean, I have to say that it's easier sometimes for these leaders these days because it's much easier to manipulate the public than it has ever been in history. You can spread all kinds of misinformation to millions of people just by clicking the send button. People these days want to believe in lies more than they want to believe in the truth. Sometimes it's amazing to see how good common sense and basic facts and historical reference have just been thrown out the window. I mean, we always believed that 1 + 1 = 2, right? Until someone came out and said, oh, it's 3. And the other side is lying to you and trying to destroy your way of life by making you believe it's 2 when it's 3. It's an attack on your right to say it's 3, and we need to join together and rise up to bring down the 2s with violence if necessary. Okay, that was a little extreme, but not really that different than what has been going on. In the U.S. right now, there's a lot of 2s and 3s. Granted, there are more 2s than 3s. However, there's a lot of people that are still a little unsure exactly what 1 + 1 really equals. The 2s are like, come on, do the math. It's 1 and 1. And the 3s are like, we need to take back our country. Yes, this week, the U.S. had its midterm elections. Many were saying that this is the most important election in our time. But of course, they say that about every election. But there was some truth to this because in this election, democracy was on the line. If we look back at the presidential election in 2020, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in the popular vote and in the electoral college vote. Of course, the electoral college vote is the one that really counts. It was 306 to 232, and that's a pretty big gap. Did it seem weird? Was it a surprise that he won? No, it wasn't. The polls leading up to the election never had Trump in the lead. Even the Trump-backed TV stations said the chances of Trump winning were near none. And the election came out exactly how they predicted it would. Now, in previous years, when a side loses in a presidential election, they concede the election and make a call to the winner and congratulate them. But instead, Trump and his boys said no. We do not accept the outcome, and we will stay in power even if we lost. So when all the court cases failed and trying to declare martial law failed and intimidating the counters failed, they had the idea that they would get Republicans in certain states to send electors that they would choose, not the ones the people would choose. They would get those fake electors to throw out votes of the Democrat areas. And then when the Democrats would complain, they would do whatever they could do to get it sent to the Supreme Court, which had 3 judges that Trump picked, then get it decided by Congress, who was at the time Republican. But inevitably, that did not work because the Republicans in those key states that were supposed to go along with this plan, they did not. They realized this was wrong, that it was illegal, and they would have bad long-term effects on the country, that here in the U.S., we have a clear winner, Biden, and we know it. And no, we are being pushed to say it was Trump, but it was not. Even though they wanted it to be Trump, they realized that it just can't be. But still, many tried to keep Trump in power by saying, well, he must have been cheated, even though to this day there is no evidence of that. But the interesting thing is that Trump and many of his people knew that he was not cheated, but continued to say it anyway, because a certain part of the country wants to believe it. We don't care if it's true or not. We're going to believe it. And if you don't keep Trump in power, then we will try to do something that has not been done in the U.S. in hundreds of years: violence. We will take the presidency by force, which, as we all know at this point, did not work either. They broke a lot of stuff. They beat up some police. They pooped everywhere, and a couple people died, but it didn't work. But the question remains that if the people in charge of the individual states would have gone along with Trump's plan, what if they would have circumvented democracy and got the elections pushed into the Supreme Court, who would have used a law that says that if the states cannot decide who won, then the Congress will decide? And what if the Congress was won by Trump supporters? In the election that happened this past week, the people were running in the different states said that if they had been in power, then they would have done just that. They would have thrown democracy out the window and would have installed the loser instead of the winner. Now, many believe that this election was about the economy or abortion or inflation or the environment, but in the end, it was really about democracy. Would the public follow Trump and vote for his people that he picked that would in turn do everything they could, illegal or not, to put him back in power in 2024? The world was watching this election closely because, well, the U.S. is the leader of democracy. And now they are the ones closest to losing it. So this week, the U.S. voted, and even though it was very, very close, it looks like the choice between Trump and democracy, they picked democracy. The massive red wave, as it's called, by the Trump party that would supposedly sweep across the country, winning every election and winning the Senate, winning the House, and they would set the stage for Trump returning to the presidency. Well, that didn't happen, at least not yet. As of today, it's a toss-up of who could win in the House. Now, it looks as if the House of Representatives may go Republican, however, not by a huge majority that they would need to overthrow an election. And the Senate, we thought it could come down to the state of Georgia, which the people will decide between a preacher named Warnock and the Trump-backed football player Herschel Walker, who we have talked about here on the show before. Remember the guy who's against abortion, except for the girlfriends that he's gotten pregnant while he was married? But as of today, it looks like Georgia will not be that needed to decide the winner of the Senate. I mean, this election had many Trump-backed candidates that claimed that, without evidence, Joe Biden cheated Trump in the election. They said, don't spend so much time looking at the math. Elect me. This is the only way we can get Trump back into office. Well, those candidates have lost, even in places where they should have won. Currently, they are saying that the biggest loser in this election has been Trump. Trump, in an interview, said that if his candidates lose, well, it's not his fault. However, if they win, it was because of him. This has been played over and over on many shows. And after that, many Republicans are starting to say, maybe it's time we look for another leader. We tried this for a while, and it's just not working out for us. In 2020, they lost the presidency, they lost the House, they lost the Senate, and now with Joe Biden as president in a bad economy and inflation going through the roof, they still can't win. And the reason seems to be Trump. Trump was supposed to announce his candidacy for presidency this week, and many Republicans had asked him not to. Could it be that the U.S. is finally starting to snap out of it? Are Republicans now realizing that Trump and his crazy conspiracy-ridden candidates are simply not going to work anymore, and that it's time to think about the future before it gets any worse? Are they starting to realize that maybe democracy is not that bad after all? And that, well, 1 + 1, it really does equal 2. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Thank you for being with us today. World War III. We're always talking about World War III. We had 1 and 2, so isn't it about time we have 3? We thought that maybe Russia, the Ukrainian war, it might become the big 3, but it's looking less and less likely. I mean, we can't tell what Putin will do, but it looks like his revival of the Cold War has fallen flat. I mean, he seems more of just a big bully. He will meet you on the playground and trade insults, have a push fight maybe, but doesn't seem like to get to the point where he's going to blow up the school. Many thought that if China would just get involved in the war, then maybe we were looking at a global conflict. China is a big factor, but it looks like they don't really want to get involved too much in this because, well, they have their own problems right now. That we have teetered with the idea of another world war several times in the past, but unlike WW1 and WW2, we now have the ability to blow up the other side with a bomb, and they have the same capability as us. People don't remember that we almost got into World War III back in the 50s. After World War II, the U.S. drew a line through the middle of Korea, right on the 38th parallel, 38 degrees north latitude. All the communists on one side, all the democratic people on the other. Before there was one Korea, and now there were 2. Basically putting the North Koreans and the Russians on one side and the U.S. and South Korea on the other. Seemed fair. However, the North didn't see it that way, really, and the South really didn't either. There were constant battles going on at the border, but neither side really had the firepower to take out the other side. But both sides had friends that did have the firepower and the nuclear bombs, and this is how global conflicts begin. You have a small conflict, and eventually the outside countries will decide to get involved, and then you have a possibility of a world war. In 1950, the North Koreans, with the help of the Russians, rolled their Soviet tanks into South Korea. The Americans, who didn't really want to get involved, saw this as a threat to bring communism to the world, and they could not let that happen. So they decided to defend the South, and the Korean War was born. The North was disciplined. They were ready to fight. They had Russian weaponry. The South, on the other hand, was not ready to fight, and they tended to retreat if there was a battle. So the Americans needed to intervene. Of course, then the American soldiers sent to Korea were having to drink the water, which caused all kinds of problems on their intestines. But eventually, the Americans figured out what to do and pushed the North Koreans back onto their side. That's why, I mean, at that point, why didn't they just make one Korea? That would have solved all the problems that we're having today. Americans did not try to create a single democratic country for fear that China would get involved, which mostly had stayed out of it so far. So the beaten North Koreans were able to continue as a dictatorship on the other side of that 38th parallel. South Korea got an extra 1,500 square miles for their trouble. And now there's a 2-mile gap between the two sides, the demilitarized zone. Nearly 5 million people died in that war, and there was a time where it looked like it could escalate to include the Chinese, the Europeans, the Russians, and the nuclear weapons. But it didn't. At the time, North Korea did not have a nuclear weapon. Only the U.S. did. But if they did hold this scenario, it might have turned out very different. Now, you might think that after all this time, things might have changed, that we as human beings might have realized that the war does not really accomplish what we were hoping that it would. And we surely don't need another 5 million people to die. But world leaders sometimes just don't see it that way. For instance, Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader of North Korea, his goal currently seems to be how to acquire weapons of mass destruction. It is because he needs to protect his borders. Okay, not really. No one really wants to go to North Korea, do they? No one is trying to take over this poor nation that is suffering from starvation and disease. What most of the world wants to see is the people of North Korea doing better. But their leader wants weapons, big weapons that can blow up a city. But why? Why spend all your food money on weapons? Could it be, as many have suggested, that North Korea eventually wants to take another try at reclaiming South Korea? I mean, the South has beautiful condos and McDonald's and iPhones. Who wouldn't want it? Now, if it was just South Korea that the North wanted to fight, this probably might have already happened. However, if they try to invade the South again, the U.S. is there to protect and defend them, and that's a big problem. And against the U.S., the North risks losing its entire country. But what if the North had a deterrent against the United States, something to make the U.S. think twice about stopping them, kind of like they did in the 1950s? In the last few months, North Korea has fired a record number of ICBMs into the ocean. Test to see what those rockets can really do. Can they control it? How much of explosive power does it have? These rockets are different than the previous rockets they had shot. These rockets can evade anti-missile systems and can be fired from rail cars and submarines and road mobile launchers. Kim Jong-un claims that these missiles are for defense against the U.S., but are they? Is it possible the U.S. will fire on North Korea? I mean, really? I mean, the U.S. has sanctions against Korea, basically to avoid having some kind of deadly conflict. But even with the sanctions, the North has managed to assemble a massive arsenal of large footprint weapons. Many times, the U.S. offered North Korea a lot just to stop this. And for a while, it looked like maybe they would. Or they would at least be open to the idea of disarmament. Now that seems to be over. And the leader of North Korea has said that they will have a nuclear weapon soon, and they have the right to use it on a preemptive atomic attack. He said that they can sanction us for 100 years. We will have a nuclear weapon. With all the missile tests going on now from North Korea, it does seem as if a nuclear test is coming soon. This will be the 7th test so far in North Korean history. The first going back to 2006 when they tested a 1 kiloton weapon. But since then, the North is getting much better at it. 2017, they set off a 250 kiloton nuclear explosion. That's 16 times more powerful than the bomb used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Kim Jong-un has progressively been making more and more powerful weapons over the last decade. And this leads to wonder how big this next test is going to be. Many believe that North Korea has enough fission material to build 45 to 55 nuclear weapons and may already have a nuclear warhead. In fact, they may already have 50 to 70 manufactured nuclear warheads. But the question remains is, have they been able to develop a delivery system? Now, we are starting to understand why all these ICBM tests are going on this year. Also, there is a satellite imagery showing that they are building new tunnels, which are presumably designed for bomb testing. Remember before Kim claimed that they had destroyed their nuclear test sites, which are underground tunnels made for testing these massive weapons? I mean, Kim can't test a nuclear weapon in the open sea, can he? Everyone would see it. The question is the next test, will it be even a bigger bomb than that 250 kiloton bomb that they set off in 2017? Or actually a smaller one that he can use to attach to one of these missiles that he has? And if they do a test in one of these underground tunnels, how are we going to tell exactly how big it is? The North Koreans have gotten much better at hiding all these tests, but in order for Kim to have a tactical, usable nuclear weapon, he's going to need to test one. He surely has the bombs he wants, but how can he get the bombs to the targets before they are shot down by the U.S.? This is a hard part. Several years they have showed the world that they have a missile that can hit the U.S. Remember, we talked about that back when he tested it. The Hwasong 15 rocket can hit a target 8,000 miles away. And they claim they even have a Hwasong 17 rocket, which is known as the monster missile, which can go even farther than that. But still, you have to get there without being shot down and be able to fit a nuclear device on the missile and then trigger it the correct time and have a heat shield that can protect the weapon once it enters the Earth's atmosphere. This, it turns out, is pretty hard to do. But experts believe that Kim now has the ability to do some of these things, just maybe not all of them yet, as they monitor his tests, of many of which have been failures. But all the failures we can see, there's enough successes to know that North Korea is getting better all the time at doing this. They are firing them from submarines and trains. They are learning to evade other missiles. Their engineers and scientists are not working on ways to feed the people. They are working on how to fit a nuclear bomb onto a rocket. But if the North indeed is thinking about how it will take over the South with its new arsenals of weapons, it still has the U.S. to contend with, who has extremely better weapons than North Korea could ever compete with, unless, of course, someone helps them. Like I said, when outside entities step in, that's when you start to worry. Russia backed them before, and they have been trying to secretly help the Russians in their quest to take over the Ukraine. Doesn't seem so far-fetched that they would return the favor somehow to North Korea. Russia might not fire a nuke, but they might just give one to someone that would fire one. So is WW3 possible? Definitely getting closer to being possible. For now, we will just keep watching our satellites and, of course, making those end-of-the-world movies. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Let's get you updated on the Ukrainian war, because there have been some huge developments there. As we have been saying over the last few months, things have not been going incredibly well for the Russians. The Ukrainians keep announcing that they took over this region, they took over that region, 8,000 square kilometers there, 3,000 kilometers there. You know, Russia blew back in February and March, and they seized huge swaths of land and recently claimed it as part of Russia, even installed its own officials there through forced elections. However, the Ukrainians have slowly been taking it back piece by piece. I keep hearing phrases such as the new starting point and the new turning point in the war, as the Ukrainians keep creeping closer and closer to those Russian-held cities. But this week was a big one. There were several places that Russia had occupied and claimed as their own for the rest of time. Remember when Putin made that big announcement saying that there were all these places were now part of Russia, and that's that? Well, this week, that wasn't that, as Russians were forced to leave Kherson. Kherson is one of the largest shipbuilding cities in that part of the Ukraine. The Russian military has occupied that region since the beginning of the war. However, with the Ukrainian military constantly blowing the supply depots and picking off the Russian soldiers left and right, they finally decided, they're going to call it quits. The supply lines were cut off, and constant loss of Russian soldiers. Finally, they said, we got to get out of here. But this is a planned retreat, unlike that one that happened a few weeks ago. Remember we talked about that? Where the Russians had to turn and run. This retreat has been a bit more orderly. Putin is known for saying he will never retreat, never show weakness in the face of the enemy. But this is the reality of war. And right now, it's either stay and die or pull back. The Russians are continually having to pull back farther and farther because the Ukrainians are just not going to give up. Now, Putin did not make the announcement about the retreat. Putin does not take responsibility for retreats, nor does he admit them. He does not want to be associated with any kinds of failure. This is something we expected from Putin. If there was good news, he will be right there to give it out for all to hear. But the bad news, he pushes the blame to usually someone else, usually his generals. So while they were announcing the retreat, Putin was inaugurating a giant Ferris wheel back in the safety of Russia. But Putin can no longer ignore what's happening in the Ukraine. He can't just keep saying the war is going as planned. At some point, he's going to have to face facts. Military experts have been saying for weeks that Russia would struggle to keep Kherson because they don't have the manpower. Now, this subject of Kherson is not entirely new. Before, Putin had rejected the military's pleas to withdraw from the area after there have been extreme casualties on the Russian side, but finally they convinced him that there is a shortage of personnel and they can't even supply the people they have there, and they can't afford to just throw away soldiers anymore. Also, winter is coming. There will not be as much fighting during the winter months, but then there's the issue of housing, transportation, fuel, and food. So it's perceived now that the Russians will move to the other side of the Dnipro River and take this time to regroup and train some new soldiers. One of the biggest problems the Russians have is sending in those brand new soldiers to the front lines with very little training. And once they get there, they are meeting battle-hardened, experienced Ukrainian soldiers. Like I said, the Russians can't afford to just keep throwing away soldiers like this. Of course, the Russians have already started to spin this as a consolation to the Ukrainians, that they are somehow doing this as part of a gesture of good faith to the Ukrainian people, even though this land that Russia has claimed was not theirs to begin with. And if this is gestures of good faith, why did they blow up the bridge before they left? Why did they leave landmines all over the place? Why did they leave booby trap bombs in washing machines for civilians to set off? And why did they supposedly leave military personnel there dressed as civilians for the purpose of sabotaging things if the Ukrainians return? If you remember a few weeks ago, the Russians had to leave very fast. They were forced to leave hundreds of pieces of heavy armored gear in the hands of the Ukrainians. But this time, they had some extra time to pack up the gear and create some extra destruction. So the Ukrainians are coming back very slowly, very carefully. But this is, without a doubt, a big loss for Russia. Currently, they are teetering around 100,000 soldiers killed since the war started. There were supposed to be very few casualties. This war was supposed to be over and done with in just a few months. But that is not happening. And the Ukrainians currently are on a roll. They believe that they have the momentum to push the Russians out by next year and take back their country. Meanwhile, at the G20 summit, which is coming up, Putin has decided that he will skip it. He does not want to have a big conflict with all these countries that want him expelled from the G20. It's believed that if he came, people would walk out of any meeting that Putin would attend. President Biden will be attending. As we know, Putin really likes Trump, and currently Trump is being dumped by the American people in favor of democracy. Democracy is also a known enemy of Putin. So setting foot in the G20 could end up being more embarrassing than valuable. Also, we're not really sure if China's President Xi is coming. And that would make for an interesting, awkward moment if Putin, Xi, and Biden were all there at the same time. Xi wanting to figure out a way to trade with Russia without really saying it, and at the same time needing the U.S. However, the U.S. is on the side of Taiwan, and they really would like to take a shot at taking that country back because, like Russia and the Ukraine, they believe they are entitled to take Taiwan. To make matters even more weird, they're in Jakarta, who is hosting the event. They have invited President Zelensky of the Ukraine to come to the G20. He immediately said that he would not take part in anything if Putin was there, but he's for sure not coming. So Zelensky said that he would at least attend virtually. Also, President Biden has announced that he will meet with President Xi to discuss where each of their red lines are, but not planning to make any fundamental concessions to China. Biden said that One of his main goals at the summit is to counter China's ever-growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. He plans to launch the U.S.-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which is designed to take on the issue of climate change and health security, threats to the rule of law, and to build up the Indo-Pacific so that it is free and open. He wants to talk about the assistance the U.S. is willing to give to Southeast Asia in the amount of $850 million. He said that this is his third summit in Southeast Asia, which shows that what kind of importance that the U.S. puts on the relationship between the ASEAN countries, and he wants to walk in lockstep with all the empowered and unified ASEAN countries. Biden was asked if he would meet with Putin when he showed up. Biden said he did not see a good reason for that. However, if Putin wanted to discuss the Brittany Griner issues, he would talk. Speaking of Brittany Griner, remember that story? She's that WNBA star that was in Russia to play with their basketball teams when at the airport security found a vape cartridge in her luggage. That vape cartridge contained a very small amount of cannabis oil. For that, she was charged with drug smuggling and sentenced to 9 years in a penal colony. She appealed the harsh sentence, and her appeal was denied. By the way, this all started just before the Ukrainian war. There was talk of a partner swap between a real hardened actual Russian arms dealer and Brittany, but that seems to have all dried up. So this week, they sent Brittany to a Russian penal colony to serve her 9-year sentence. So what is actually at one of those Russian penal colonies? Well, it's exactly what you might think, or maybe worse. First of all, there are 700 of them spread out across Russia, and only 46 are women's penal colonies, very far from any city, very remote, making it very impossible for anyone to visit. This is a form of isolation, which is believed part of their punishment, making it so you cannot see your family. They are very cold, harsh conditions filled with disease and hunger. They viewed their views as the harshest in all of Europe. Their history goes all the way back to the 18th century when they were known as gulags. About 18 million were sentenced there during the time of Stalin, and 1.6 million never came back. They died in the work camps. Currently, they still don't know exactly where Griner has been taken. However, it will definitely be a life that she's not used to, being a world-class basketball star. She will live in the barracks with around 100 other women. They will all get to take a bath once a week in cold water. There are only 3 toilets. They will be forced to sew uniforms of the Russian police and military. These prisons are very well known to have extreme human rights abuses, including frequent beatings from the guards. There are stories about living among rats, losing fingers in the sewing machines. Also crazy stories about burning kittens. But of course, the biggest problem Brittany will face is that the prisoners' lives are very, very close together. They're in very close quarters. Supposedly each prisoner has only 20 square feet of space, but that's known for really not being the case. There's a limited access to water. Personal hygiene is often neglected. This makes many of the colonies incubators for epidemics like AIDS and tuberculosis and COVID, and they run rampant in these prisons. And women in the system are often denied medical care altogether. Also, it's known that foreigners, such as Brittany, will get no special care or perks of any kind. There is constant overtime work demanded, and if you refuse, the guards will threaten retribution. You can end up working 17-hour days, and torture is not unheard of at these facilities. Griner told her lawyer as the court hearings were going on that she was growing increasingly fearful of the miserable and inhumane conditions she would soon be facing. She is very obviously a bargaining chip in the current situation between the Russians and the United States. She's an icon in the United States, and they will always back her. Seems crazy they would put her in a penal colony for 9 years because of a vape cartridge. But this is obviously less about an accidental leaving a vape cartridge in your luggage and more about the value you have during the time of a war. At age 32, the sentence in the penal colony will be the end of her career as a basketball player. She was considered the greatest woman player of all time. And of course, the U.S. is outraged by her incarceration. Like I said, even President Biden has spoken out on the subject, and seems to be doing everything possible to secure her release, no one will know how she will be treated in these prisons. I mean, even now, they don't even know where she is. So will we ever get to see Britney ever play basketball again? Well, at this point, let's just hope that we see her alive again. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Let's get to some money news. You know what question I get asked a lot these days? Why are rich people losing all their money? Seems on Facebook every day there's a news story that pops up that this person has lost so much money, and it shows their sad face. Now, this may not be sad news for you. It may actually be some ha-ha news for you, because it's nothing better than to seeing rich people lose money. But it's true. Rich people over these last 6 months are losing big time, not just in the Philippines or in the U.S., but everywhere. In China, 239 people that were billionaires are no longer billionaires. And the super rich Chinese are dropping billions like there's no tomorrow. Yang Huang of Country Gardens, they're the big developer, he's down 15.7 billion. Forrest Li, the e-commerce guy in Singapore, is down 13.7 billion. Jack Ma, as we know from Alibaba, he's down 29%. So why are all these crazy rich Chinese losing their crazy wealth so quickly? Well, for the same reason everyone is losing their wealth. The Ukrainian-Russian war, sharp drop in tech prices, slow post-COVID recovery. But in China, of course, the big one, continued disruptions to the economy from the localized COVID outbreaks, also known as the zero COVID policy. For instance, Foxconn and that lockdown of the smartphone plant with all the people jumping the fence and running away. It's just crazy there. I mean, China has many reasons for the rich people getting swatted like flies. The incredible downfall of the property market, for one. You know how the Philippine condos are going up left and right, same as in China. However, because of the fall in the housing market, some buildings are slow to get finished, are not even getting finished at all. So now, if you have to make your mortgage payment, but your place may never get finished, some people want to just stop paying. Everyone is afraid to buy now. The markets are down 20%, 30%. Property developers are under immense pressure as people's property investments are just losing by the day. According to the regulatory crackdown going on in the tech scene in China, it's wreaking havoc on everything from company profits to employment. President Xi is trying to tighten his grip on power, so foreign investors are taking their money and going to safer waters. China, who has been big time open for business for the past few decades, is turning its back on big foreign companies in favor of state-owned companies. The world is coming to the realization that the post-pandemic China is not going to be the same as it was before. And you know, when this zero COVID policy stuff will end, who knows? I mean, iron and steel was one of the go-to commodities for China, and it fell by up to 80%. Meanwhile, there was a heat wave and a drought, and the problem with the electric grid due to all the heat. And the U.S. China are not that buddies that they always were before. The U.S. has been looking into Chinese companies doing business in the U.S. Investors are pulling their money from the China companies in fear of how the U.S. government could react to how China is actually doing business in the U.S. All this is making it harder and harder for the rich to stay rich in China. So as the super rich in China watch their wealth disappear, well, so is everyone else. Remember, we were talking about that Asian dude from Binance, Xiaoping Zhao? He held the record for the richest man in crypto and the founder of the largest crypto exchange. He was the biggest voice in crypto, and now he holds the record for losing the most money in crypto. Actually, wait a minute. He's now holds the record for the biggest loser of money ever. Just this past month, he blew past Masayoshi Son, who held the title before with his losing of $77 billion back in the dot-com era. So how much did Zhao lose? Well, $87 billion. The crypto market has collapsed. Now, the guy is still wealthy, still has $14.9 billion left, but it's got to sting a bit to lose that much in just a short amount of time. Of course, the big question on everyone's mind is, will crypto be back? Or will they, like the .com companies did, just disappear? I have many friends in crypto, and they are all currently stuck. They have made tons of cash, but they can't sell. And they can't take an 80 to 90% loss. Right now, FTX, one of the most famous exchanges in crypto, with their CEO, Bankfried, this goofy guy with this funky hair, has always been on TV, went the youngest billionaire in the world, having $26 billion in personal wealth, and is basically broke now. His company was going to be sold to Binance before, that guy that we were just talking about. But that whole thing went south. And now FTX is looking at bankruptcy. I mean, it was just last year when they were the rockin' crypto exchange. Everyone wanted to be a part of it. They had cool commercials, and they were getting a sports arena named after them. Big celebrities were buying into them. But as we have said on this show, cryptocurrencies is a concept, not a physical piece of currency or actual company or actual product. Its value is based on hype. And with all the hype it has one day, the next day could be very different. People heard that FTX might now not be able to give you back your crypto. Everyone went at once and tried to withdraw, and boom, the exchange didn't have the cash. So what happened? The young CEO resigned. And the complicated act of bankruptcy in a global crypto exchange begins. Withdrawals have been halted on the company. Speaking of taking a loss, let's move to the U.S. people. The man who doesn't know what to spend his money on, Elon Musk, is realizing maybe he should spend more time planning his purchases and less time trying to be famous. He's looking at a $66.4 billion loss this year. He's also hinting at the possibility of bankrupting his current acquisition, Twitter. I mean, after all the blah, blah, blah about turning the company around, and now he's talking about burning the whole house down. This week, more top guys at Twitter are leaving the country, especially in the security, privacy, and compliance sections. This has prompted the warning from the Federal Trade Commission to say, hey, we have reached a settlement with you before, so you better follow it. Meanwhile, many of his people, Elon fired last week, he realized, oh crap, I need some of these people to help me run this company. So he has offered jobs to the people that he just fired. And then there's this whole $8 per month bill you must pay to get verified on Twitter. Well, as you can imagine, the first day of that didn't go as planned, because anyone can get a blue check. You just have to pay $8. So people with the name Elon Musk had a blue check mark on it. Yes, people were now impersonating Elon Musk. Comedian Sarah Silverman changed her name to Elon Musk and wrote, I am a freedom of speech absolutist, and I eat duty for breakfast every day. Someone else named Elon Musk wrote, I support free speech and Twitter unless you're making fun of me, which is illegal. Well, Elon then suspended those people. He then tweeted, going forward, any Twitter handles engaging in impersonation without clearly specifying parody will be permanently suspended. So much for his earlier Twitter tweet before that stated that comedy is now legal again. But the problem is that this is just what happened in a week. And this kind of crazy stuff makes advertisers nervous. So they are jumping the Twitter ship as quick as possible. But Elon is not the only one down some big bucks. Larry Page from Google, he's down $39.2 billion. Missed his growth targets. YouTube sales are down. Jeff Bezos from Amazon down $65.7 billion. He was doing so good during the pandemic. However, after the announcement that sales were for the holidays might be quite a bit lower than they expected, he lost $23 billion overnight. And what about our Facebook friend, Mark Zuckerberg? Facebook stock has plunged 57% this last year, mostly because of Apple's new privacy policies. And of course, competition from TikTok. So the metaverse that was supposed to change all our lives has mostly changed only Mark's life slightly. He's down somewhere around 87 billion, right along there with the Binance guy. So of these rich people who have lost their money, it's pretty much the same reason as we all have lost our money. The economy sucks. We said the pandemic would eventually have an effect, and it has for sure. As we all sit back and bite our nails and just stare at our financial apps on our phones and pray. But there's one guy I have to point out who has lost billions and billions for another reason. Bill Gates has lost $27.3 billion, but not really because of the economy, mostly because he just gave it away. Bill said that he will soon be removed from the richest people alive list as he plans to give all his money to charity. So weird having a rich person doing that, isn't it? I mean, helping others that are less fortunate than you seems crazy in the world we live in today, doesn't it? But it's kind of nice to hear. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and RJTV. Today in health, we're going to be talking about cholera. No, you don't hear a lot about cholera these days because it's just not around as much anymore. But back in the 1800s, there were multiple outbreaks of the disease. India always comes to mind. Back in 1817, the British Army and Navy ships, they seemed to be the ones spreading it all around after their trips to India. Continued to spread Southeast Asia and Europe and Eastern Africa and North and South America. Then later even in Canada. In 1870, it spread up and down the Mississippi River in the U.S., bringing it from the coast into the mainstream of the American public. Boats and ships used to have a yellow flag on them if cholera had broken out on the boat. Now, it killed tens of millions of people worldwide. In Russia alone, it killed more than 1 million people died from the disease. In India, something like 8 million people died over that span. Why do you die of cholera anyway? Usually, actually, it's from dehydration. Cholera basically is a stomach disease in which it's an infection that develops in the small intestines. Basically, you have diarrhea so bad that the body becomes severely dehydrated. The eyes start to sink in and the skin loses its elasticity and wrinkling occurs in the hands and feet. Sometimes the skin will even turn blue. The disease has spread via bad food and bad water that has been contaminated by human feces that has the bacteria. In other words, your food and water has poop in it. One of the big reasons for cholera is poverty, where there is less or no modern sanitation. Now, we have antibiotics for this bacteria. However, back during the large pandemics, they thought it was passed by the air. They thought that warming the stomach was the cure. The treatment at that time was to wear flannel belts that was around 6 feet long, and you wrapped it around your stomach. And that didn't work. Tchaikovsky, one of the great composers, died of cholera. So did Charles X, King of France, James Polk, the 11th President of the United States. But this was a long time ago. So why are we talking about cholera today? The reason I'm bringing up this subject is because cholera is back. In Haiti, there have been an outbreak of cholera. So far, 136 people have died from it. 87 of those died while in the hospital, and the rest were at home. And these are just the people who have died. Right now, they're taking 250 people a day infected with the disease. And the big problem in Haiti right now is they're running out of hospital beds.